This form of capitalism, which I call predatory capitalism, is based on a goal of maximizing short-term materialistic consumption and short-term profits for corporations. It's consuming and polluting itself toward extinction, quite frankly.
Welcome to Common Denominator. I'm your host, Moshe Popak. And in each episode, we sit down with someone who's faced adversity, achieved remarkable success, and is making a positive impact on the world. Today's guest is a man whose life reads like a thriller and whose work challenges us to rethink how our global economy operates. John Perkins is a New York Times best-selling author and activist who once served as chief economist at a major consulting firm, advising the World Bank, the UN, the IMF, Fortune 500 companies, and government leaders around the world. His job to engineer multi-billion-dollar loans that enriched corporations and elites but left entire nations trapped in debt. He later blew the whistle, calling himself an economic hitman. His memoir, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, spent more than 70 weeks on the bestseller list. He now teaches business leaders and students how to replace what he calls a death economy with a regenerative life economy, blending finance, spirituality, and social justice.
GDP only measures how well the wealthy are doing. That's why we call it a hitman, because this is what we're doing, is putting countries into this debt trap, helping the rich, and in the end, the loan couldn't be paid off. It was just too big for the country.
Hi, John. Welcome to Common Denominator.
It's great to be with you, Moshe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, really, because your book, your original book, your 2004 book, The Diary of an Economic Hitman, had profound effect on me. The lens of how I see life, how I question things, and how I don't take things just as is. How would you explain in simple terms an economic hitman?
And actually, it's Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And, my real title was chief economist at a Boston-based consulting firm, a major firm that did a lot of work for the U.S. government and the World Bank and the United Nations and overseas governments, foreign governments. My job was really to identify countries that had resources our corporations wanted, like oil in those days was the big one. It still is, but now there's also lithium and rare minerals and other things. And to identify that country and then to arrange a huge loan to the country using its resources collateral. But the money would never actually go to the country. It would instead come right to the United States to pay U.S. corporations, primarily construction engineering corporations like Bechtel, Halliburton, Stone and Webster, my company, Charles T. Main, to build big infrastructure projects in that country. Things like power plants, highways, ports, airports, industrial parks, things that I believed at the time were really good for the country because you can show that they increase the GDP and the GDP per capita, which sounds like it means that everybody's doing better per capita, everybody.
Mm.
But the fact of the matter is I would later discover after about 7 years into that business that really what I was benefiting was the very rich who needed lots of electricity, who primarily used the highways, the ports, the airports, and most of the electricity. They own the industries, they own the banks, they own the commercial establishments. So that's why we call it a hitman, because this is what we were doing, was putting countries into this debt trap, helping the rich, and in the end, the loan couldn't be paid off. It was just too big for the country. And so we'd go back in under the guise of the International Monetary Fund usually and say, hey, since you can't pay your debts, sell your oil or whatever the collateral resource was, real cheap to our corporations without environmental or social regulations. And maybe other things like vote with us on the next UN vote against China or Cuba, or let us build a military base on your soil, or privatize your water and sewage systems and other public utilities and publicly owned businesses and sell them to our investors real cheap. So we were really creating a kind of economic empire.
Also, just a little background, because you always hear this when it comes to international banking, the IMF, World Bank. What's kind of the difference and what's their main objectives of these international banks? What do they actually do?
Well, yeah. So the World Bank and its sister organizations like the Inter-American Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, their primary job is to make loans to these countries, and usually the money doesn't go to the country. It just goes from a bank in Washington D.C., for example, to a bank in Houston or San Francisco, where the engineering companies are. That has changed a bit in more recent years. These banks have gotten a little bit more conscious of needing to provide more grants that are interest free. But in my day, just about everything had pretty high interest attached to it. So they were putting these countries deep into debt, and their goal really was to help our corporations make big profits off the infrastructure development projects, and also get the collateral, which was, as I said, one of the resources of that country. The IMF was kind of what you might call the policing agent. So when the country couldn't repay its loans, when it was poised to default, countries can't actually default, but they go deep into debt, and the debt rating lowers or goes down to nothing, and then insurance rates go up. It's really a difficult thing for countries to be in that position. The IMF goes in and says, "Hey, we'll restructure your loan," but there are conditionalities attached. And so therefore, we'll restructure the loan, but in the process, you have to sell your resource, your collateral, real cheap to our corporations. And as I said before, meet other conditions like voting with us on the UN vote or letting us build a military base on their soil. So you get these two systems. You get the bank, and then you get the fallback when the country can't pay its debts.
So I guess the reason is just basically to be able to get the resources out of these smaller countries. That's mainly the main idea. When was it that the moment, that kind of like aha moment, that you realized that this was happening for you?
So, first of all, what I learned in business school, what the World Bank teaches still, and the business schools teach, is when you invest, if you want to help a poor country, and make these kind of investments in heavy infrastructure. China's been extremely good at this, incidentally. That's another story that China's taking this whole process over now. And the economy will grow. And statistically, we can show that it does. Gross domestic product grows when you invest a lot in these big infrastructure projects. And again, you measure this, you call it GDP per capita. Well, that sounds like everybody's doing better. And so I believe this for 7 years on that job. I was had the job for 10 years, and for about 7, I really believed that. But one of my clients was the head of state of Panama, Omar Torrijos, and he took me aside one time and he says, "John, don't you realize that you're being lied to, and you're lying to yourself, and you're lying to the
Mm.
world now? That GDP only really primarily measures how well the wealthy are doing. Most of the people in our country, their percentage of what goes into GDP is extremely small. And GDP per capita doesn't measure how well everybody's doing. It's simply how well the wealthy are doing divided by the number of people in the country." At that point, I began to look into that and discovered, yeah, that was true. So, these statistics were effective, and they were true statistics, but very, very biased toward a form of colonialism, in essence. And once I realized that, I had a hard time getting out. First of all, nobody wanted me to get out. And second of all, I was making a very good salary. And I came from a relatively poor teacher's family in rural New Hampshire. And suddenly I'm flying first class around the world, staying in the best hotels, wining and dining in the finest restaurants, meeting with presidents, and making a good salary. So I didn't want to believe what I knew to be true. And I think that's an important point because there's a
Mm.
lot of people in this business that may or may not be, really know what's going on, but they don't want to know what's going on because they think they're living the American dream.
What would be, in your mind, the better situation? Like, I guess, this kind of the system in a way of capitalism, right? So the whole goal of capitalism seems like, right, to create jobs. The other alternative, I guess, would be communism in a way, where everybody's, or socialism, right, where everybody's kind of equal. Is there a utopia in your mind? Is there a system that you think could possibly work better between all countries, or let's just say the United States, and that
Yeah.
actually works better?
Yeah. Well, let's look at it this way. So, this form of capitalism, which I call predatory capitalism, is based on a goal of maximizing short term materialistic consumption and short term profits for corporations. And that has driven us to this really degenerative, what economists are calling a death economy, an
Right.
economic system that's consuming and polluting itself toward extinction, quite frankly. The alternative is what we call a life economy, and that's an economic system that's based on maximizing long-term benefits for life. And it means paying people. And incidentally, it doesn't mean not making profits. Corporations, businesses have to make a short-term profit, but they don't have to maximize it. They can put some of the money back into making a better future, to paying their employees well, to buying healthcare and retirement pension funds for people, to taking care of the environment. So you can put some of that money back in, keep some of the profits, and you hire people. You make a business out of getting people to regenerate, rejuvenate destroyed environments, to figure out ways to really corral all the plastic in the ocean and recycle it, that kind of thing, to come up with new technologies. I mean, we've been moving in that direction until this last administration, frankly. With solar and wind and electric cars, we were moving toward a life economy where people make a short-term profit. You pay people and you use capitalism. It's just it has a different goal than maximizing short-term materialistic consumption and profits. This idea that, in order for me to win, you got to lose. It's a false perception. It's a perception that now is part of our predatory capitalistic system, but it's not a necessary component of capitalism.
I happen to agree with that analysis. I think in my world, my main business is real estate, and I'm constantly thinking about win-win, how everybody wins in the long
Mhm.
term. That's how I think about it. It is a shame, the predatory, because again, I have children and it's going to be grandchildren. Think about the future. I know you have, I guess you don't call it a third version of your book, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. But before the show, we talked about how 50% of the book talks about China. I know from the US perspective that the national security issue, the top issue is China. Do you see it that way, and why?
No, I don't see China as a security threat except as we make it one,
Mm.
which I'm afraid we're doing. China's not never been, or at least in modern times, a a country that's tried to take over other countries militaristically. It does not have military bases in other countries except a couple in Africa, which are really supply bases more than military. The United States, we have over 100, over 100 countries we have military bases.
By the way, I was just gonna mention, that point that you just made, that the US has military bases in over 100 countries, pretty much 50% of the world. Most people don't realize that. That I
Yeah.
only realized recently, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, and also we have a bad
Yeah.
reputation for the CIA going in and overthrowing governments or assassinating leaders. We used to call jackals. That if the government of a country does not accept my deal, they know that behind me stands these jackals that are prepared to overthrow them or assassinate them. And the Church Commission, Frank Church Commission, back in the '70s, exposed a lot of this, of how we did this in Chile with Allende. We did it with Mossadegh in Iran and Lumumba in the Congo. We took these leaders out, or we participated in that. We supported it and initiated it. So that really hurts us around the world. People don't like to be treated that way. And China now makes a big point. It comes in with its economic hitmen who are very good. I taught a course at an MBA program in Shanghai a few years back, and I realized when I got there, these very brilliant students, they really wanted to pick my brain about what I had been done that was successful, and where I'd made my mistakes, because they were learning from me.
Mm.
And they've learned well. And so in the year 2000, the United States was the number one trading partner with 80% of the world's countries. Today, China's number one trading partner with over 70% of the world's countries. In less than a quarter of a century, China has gone like this, and the United States has gone like this around the world. There's many factors involved, but in this both that China's economic hitmen are very effective. They have an amazing story to tell about their own economic success in China, bringing 900 million people out of dire poverty. But at the same time, some of our policies have really pissed off countries around the world. So if they give them that choice, they go with China. I just came back recently from Latin America, where I spend a lot of time. And less than a year ago, I was in the Republic of Georgia and Turkey. I traveled around a lot speaking at different events. And, I keep hearing, like, why doesn't the United States honor what it says it honors of, you know, democracy? And why do you keep, militarizing? And this, what we're doing in Iran right now and what's going on in the Ukraine and what's going on in Palestine, these things have a very, very detrimental impact on the United States' ability to continue to be revered around the world, which we were for many years after World War II. We were the leader. We were the most respected country in the world. We're losing that status, unfortunately.
But let me ask you, because it seems that because we're on the American dollar as far as commodities traded on the American dollar, I think we're 25% of defense spend worldwide. And as you mentioned, 100 military bases around the world. I mean, that's the tact of our leadership today. Does America have to worry functionally about respect at this point? Because if we do, then the buildup of China will continue and they will overtake the US. Do you see that happening, let's just say in 10 years from now? I'm Moshe Popek, and I just want to say thank you, genuinely, for listening to Common Denominator. If you've been getting value from these conversations, if something sparked a thought, challenged your perspective, or helped you in your business or life, I have one small favor to ask. Please subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. It might seem like a small click, but it makes a massive difference. Subscribing tells the platform that this content matters. It helps us reach more thoughtful listeners. It helps us book stronger guests. It helps the show grow.
Well, like I said, they've already overtaken the US as far as trade is concerned. And that's from historically been the way China has expanded its influence, not militarily, but through trade. Yes, it threatens Taiwan and it threatens parts of India, but those are areas it considers to be part of China, just like we seem to consider Puerto Rico, for example, as part of the United States. So, but it doesn't go into Africa militarily, but it does go in it with trade and loans. And it has the BRICS Bank. It has several big international banks that are outdoing the World Bank now in exactly the kind of deals that I did. So they're going after the same resources. The same goal is there. It's just that they're approaching it very, very differently. I often look back and think, well, why didn't we do it that way? Why didn't we come up with the new Silk Road, which is actually a brilliant propaganda move, and it also is pretty efficient in its own from a realistic standpoint. So yeah, why didn't the United States go that route instead of a route that's really pissing off the world and putting us in a declining situation?
And how do you think artificial intelligence plays in? I saw that a new advisory council made up of, I guess, the tech billionaires was named last week. I'm just, along with everybody else, concerned what the world and what the US looks like in 5-10 years from now with regard to artificial intelligence. How does that functionally play in to the world economics?
I wish I had a crystal ball, Osha. What we do see now is China's taking a lead there. It's taking a lead in alternative energy. It's really taking a lead in building a life economy. Yes, it also continues to build coal-fired plants, but we're promoting coal-fired and fossil fuels now big time in the United States. So China's really taking a lead in AI. And I think a major difference here is that we're devoting a tremendous amount of our resources, emotional as well as physical and monetary, to wars. And China is not. China is devoting its resources to creating more of a life economy and also AI. AI ties in with that. These students that I was with at the MBA program in Shanghai, it was interesting that they said to me, China created a miracle, an economic miracle. We averaged around 10% economic growth for 30 years. Nobody's ever done that except us. We brought 900 million people out of dire poverty. Nobody's ever done that except us. That's 3 times the US population at that time. And they said, but we created this miracle at a horrible cost, environmentally and socially. But we know we can create a miracle. So we, the younger generation, we're going to create an environmental and social miracle. We grew up with horrible pollution. We don't want our children to have that. They look me in the eye and they say, you in the United States don't know what pollution is.
Mm.
Your MBA students there that'll be your future leaders, they've never experienced anything like what we experienced. We don't want our children to have to experience that. We're going to change things. And I think they're proving that to be that is where they're headed. I really think that they are understanding the need to do that. I'm not saying that China is a better country. I'm not saying anything like that. I hate the leadership there. I would not want to be under the Chinese system. But I do think that some of their policies are very astute and that they are certainly appealing to Africa and Latin America and much of the Middle East and Asia and even Europe is looking to China because of their incredible history of economic development and their emphasis today on AI, cybernetics, and environmental issues.
What would you say? What would be the common denominator of, someone listening to the show? What can they do to create a better world for tomorrow?
I'm glad you asked that question because I have a book coming out later this year. In fact, you can buy it now online or wherever, Amazon, wherever you buy books, pre-order it. It's called The Art of the Steal. And it's really about how this economic hitman system and the strategy that I helped develop in the 70s has really grown and grown and grown with both Democrat and Republican administrations. And it's really come to a head in more recent years. But at the end, the whole book is oriented toward coming up to answer that question. So it provides the history, it provides what's been going on. But at the end, there's a long section on various things and attitudes we can do. And ultimately, I think there's 5 questions that each of us as an individual can answer. And if you think about it, we're all very different, and we can all take different paths. You're in real estate. I write books, very different paths. But if we're headed toward the same destination of creating a life economy, we can get there. So, I have a good friend who's a real estate agent who, like you, is very much into the win-win situation. He also is really promoting here on this island environmentally sensitive houses, ones that you have solar on their roofs and so on and so forth. And so he's really taking this very seriously. So these 5 questions that I suggest people ask themselves is, number 1, what do you most want to do for the rest of your life? What will bring you the greatest satisfaction? And I would answer that by saying, I want to continue writing. I love to write. I've got a new book coming out later this year. I'm already studying on the next one. I have a friend who's a carpenter who would say, I want to work with my hands in wood. Number 2, how do you do this in a way that will facilitate the transformation from a death to a life economy? And I'd answer by saying, I write books that inspire people to do this, I hope, to try to do that. And my carpenter friend would say, I'm only going to use sustainable materials and replant trees. Third question is, well, what's stopping you? What's holding you back? And I might say, as a writer, I had an English teacher who said I was a bad writer, and I took him seriously. I lost my confidence, even though I thought I was a good writer. My carpenter friend would say, my clients don't want to pay the extra price for sustainable materials or to get me to replant trees. So number 4 is, when you look at that perception that's holding you back, how do you change it? So we know that perception creates reality.
Yep.
When we change perception, we change our actions. And when we change our actions, we change reality. And so for me as a writer, I'd say, well, I recognize now that English professor, he never published anything. He wasn't a great writer himself, And I am. And I'm going to write. My carpenter friend would say, well, I'm going to tell my clients that if they have to pay an extra price, it's not a cost, it's an investment in the future. And then the fifth question is, what actions do I take immediately? And for a
Mm.
writer, I've got to start writing. For a carpenter, he's got to use, sustainable wood like this one behind me and tell his clients that they're investing in the future. So every one of
Mm.
us can ask those questions. As a real estate
Mm.
agent, you can ask yourself those same questions. And whether you're a parent or a student or a teacher or whatever, those 5 questions are very, very pertinent. And I go into a lot of detail in this upcoming book, The Art of the Steal, which, it goes much, much deeper than all of that also, but that's a kind of a quick summary.
I always say this, right? There's so many ideas. People have ideas all day long, but I love that you finished on the 5 prongs with action. What action can I take? Right?
Yeah,
So you can have ideas and theories, but what am I going to do sustainably over a long period of time? Action to
yeah,
make that happen. The thing that really sticks out in my mind, I mean, I would think that there was some risks for you to come out and write the book and come out and voice what was actually happening. Is that accurate that there was some safety risks?
yeah.
And why was it that you were willing to ignore those safety risks and go ahead and publish the book originally?
When I first started writing the book, uh, back in the '80s, I wanted to be an exposé. I started contacting other people who'd had jobs like
Mm.
mine and some of the jackals who I knew. And immediately I got phone calls threatening my life, anonymous
Mm.
phone call. And my daughter, she was an infant at the time, her life. And I took them seriously. So I didn't know what to do at this point, and I get invited out to dinner by the president of Stone and Webster Engineering Corporation, a big Boston-based firm, one of the 5 biggest engineering firms in the country, probably the world. He took me out to dinner and he said, you have a great resume. You just resigned as chief economist at one of our competitors. We'd like to use your resume in our proposals. You don't have to do any work. Just let us use your resume. And I'm prepared tomorrow morning to write you a check for $500,000 as a consultant's retainer. And he said, just don't write that book. We know you're writing this book. You can't have a job like what I'm offering and have a book like that out there. So I'm getting exactly what I'd been telling heads of state of other countries, buy my deal and you and your family are going to do well because there's infrastructure. Your families own industries, your own commercial establishment,
Mm.
you're going to do well. Or if you don't, so I got a few $1 billion in this hand to help you. But if you decide not to go that route, I've got a gun over here. It's the jackals. I didn't carry a gun, but he knew as I knew that these guys were behind me that we call the jackals. And now I'm getting the same same thing. So what would you do?
Right. No, so that's why I think of that sliding doors, that fork in the road. I think we all have it in our lives,
Yeah,
especially once we start asking questions.
yeah,
I was the kid that was in the principal's office all the time. And some of my kids are that way too. Some people are just not that way. Some people are. You're just born that way. What would you find is the common denominator of someone that has courage to take action?
fear. So you
Mm.
have fear and you have the courage to move beyond it, to recognize that fear, like anger, like any of our emotions, is just an energy. And it's how you use it. Do you let fear paralyze you and keep you from doing anything? Or do you take that fear and direct it towards something? Yeah, I've been a martial artist most of my life, and I know that, if I'm up against a guy who's bigger and stronger than me, I don't try to overpower him. I use his energy against him, and and that's the same with this. So if you're fearful, what is courage? It's not lacking fear. It's facing your fear. It's going into that idea of perception. What is it that you're perceiving that you fear? And now, how do you use that energy to change the fear? And people may be asking, so how did I end up writing the book finally? I took the consulting job. I put the money toward writing. I wrote 5 other books on shamanism and indigenous cultures. I spent a lot of time in the Amazon and the Himalayas. I wrote 5 books about that before I ever wrote the Confessions book. But then on 9/11, I was deep in the Amazon. And when I came
Mm.
home, I went to ground zero. And I knew as I stood there looking at that pit that I have to come clean on what I had done. And so I decided, but I wouldn't contact anyone else. I would write a book completely in secret. It'd be a confession, not an expose, nobody else's story, just mine. And once I had the manuscript written and in the hands of an agent in New York and he was sending it out to publishers, I figured it was my best insurance policy because anybody that thought that they could stop me by assassinating me or threatening me would also realize that if they did that, it would sell a lot of books, and that was contrary to their true goal,
Mm.
which was to keep me quiet. So just ignore me, and it did take courage, but at the same time, I think that courage means that you find your way around the obstacle, that you use that third element. So what do I do? What's perception is holding me back? And then the
Mm.
fourth element, when I change that perception, how do I come up with a new idea for action? And so,
Mm.
I changed the perception. I still had the fear, and the fear was still there even in writing this book, but I manipulated it by trying to soften that touch by changing the attitude of the book, making it a confession, but at the same time realizing that I had to get the message out there.
I definitely relate to that. I've been training Brazilian Jiu Jitsu for about 15 years. And I was hoping you would say that to teach people, because it's an amazing lesson, the fear never dissipates. It is an energy. It's how you play with it, how you work with it. And that slow and steady work is an amazing life journey. And I assume from that, were there ever any real risks, physical risks after the writing of the book?
In the second book, New Confessions of an Economic Hitman is the title. I write about this, I think, in the third book too, the one about China. 3 or 4 months after the book was published, I was supposed to speak at the United Nations. The book had really gotten out there big time. It was selling millions of copies. It had been on the New York Times bestseller list every week. And I was invited to speak at the United Nations. I flew up to New York. I was living in Florida at the time in Palm Beach County. A journalist met me at the airport, took me out to lunch, and I went to the restroom after the food was served, which was I'll never do again when I'm with someone I don't know, frankly. And
Mm.
within a couple of hours, I was bleeding internally. I lost about half the blood in my body. I was rushed to Lenox Hill
Mm.
Hospital, where they removed 70% of my colon. And after that, it occurred to me, I kept getting messages from people that I'd been poisoned. Never, at the time, I just needed to get taken care of. And I'm pretty sure I was poisoned. I asked my doctor if I'd been poisoned. He said, "Well, it's entirely possible, but we've destroyed the evidence because as soon as we take out your anything out of the human body, we incinerate it."
Mm.
And the guy who took me out to lunch basically disappeared. All my publicist had was his email address, and there was no response to that email address anymore. But plus, I
Mm.
didn't try very hard to find him because I had no evidence. There was no proof. I can't prove that I was poisoned, but I'm pretty sure I
Wow.
was. But life's full of threats, right? You know,
Correct.
uh, you live in a
Even when you're
hurricane.
driving a car, right? Even
Yeah,
just think about driving a car, right?
yeah. Why the hell would you live in Florida, which is a hurricane zone? I mean, aren't you scared to death of hurricanes? And come fall, and that big one's right off the shore there. You're terrified, right? But what do? You come up with a plan. Every individual has a different plan. When I lived in Palm Beach County, we had a huge hurricane threat, Andrew, and
Mm.
my daughter lived over near Tampa, so we drove over there. That was our plan. But you're filled with fear. Don't let it paralyze you. Change your perception. How do I deal with this?
Yeah. But I want to say really thank you for this eye-opening discussion. Always really appreciate it. And I advocate whether it's Confessions of an Economic Hitman, New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, or any of your books. Riveting, super interesting. And I want to say thank you. Thank you so
Well,
much.
yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. The Art of the Steal.
The art
That's
of
the
the
best
sale.
one. Yeah, that's coming up. But I'd like to leave with a final comment, and that is,
Sure.
I think all of us should feel blessed that we're alive at this time in history
Mm.
because it's an inflection point. we are at a pivotal point. We're really, really exploring what it means to be human beings, being human on this
Mm.
planet. And to be alive right now means that we have the opportunity to participate in this in whatever level. And that's really why I wrote this most recent book, Art of the Steal, where I go into detail about what each of us can do. And and I think we should all feel incredibly, incredibly blessed to be alive right now. This is an amazing, amazing time in history.
I really love that perspective. Thank you so much, John. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. I want to take a quick moment to say how grateful I am for you. The show is not possible without your support. Every download, every share, every subscription, it all adds up. And I don't take that lightly. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to Common Denominator. It truly helps more than you know. Thank you for being part of this community.